All right, guys, welcome back to the Athletic Career Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Amelia Potter, who I really think that I first heard of Amelia on the King of the List podcast, and they had one conversation about sports psychology. And this is really one area that Amelia really specializes in. I think that, I was just telling her that as I've gotten more advanced as a powerlifter and as I've advanced as a coach, I realized that a lot more of it becomes like this stuff as you do progress with as an athlete. In general, I think that like really with like any someone who's trying to accomplish a high level in really any area of life, a lot of it comes down to this psychological component and managing expectations, like several different things that we'll talk about here. But it's really really awesome to have her on. So you guys are in for a treat. Amelia, is there anything that you would like the audience members to know about you? I think is important before you kind of delve into things.
No, thank you for the introduction. I think you kind of said it all there. But yeah, as you said, it's, I think, an important part of being an athlete. And I think it's definitely becoming more noticed, shall we say, as the years kind of progress and a bit more in the front line with things like nutrition and training.
Right. And, it's just for perspective, guys, like Amelia, I believe you said that like you're at IPF Worlds and like, these really huge competitions. Like if that doesn't tell you how important this is, that like the best athletes in the world literally are consulting Amelia and have her there to help out with things. I think that should tell you a lot. I wanted to actually ask you, so like, what got you like interested in like sports psychology and like specifically like going into powerlifting? Because I think that's like like the niche of niches, I feel like.
Yeah, so I did my bachelor's of science in just kind of psychology and counseling, that sort of thing. And I knew I wanted to do a master's because I'm a bit of a nerd. I love being in education. And I was kind of going back and forth between different types of psychology because I knew I was working with people, working with the mind. And I'd played sports and competed growing up in different sports. And really there were two things in my life that I really loved. And I was out for lunch with my mother and a friend of hers, and she works in psychology. And she was like, well, why don't you, do sports psychology then? And I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. So then I did my master's of science in sports and exercise psychology. And from there, ironically, actually, there are kind of two streams of that you can go down. It's working with athletes, which is kind of the sports psychology side of things. And people kind of work with governments and help promote better health habits. That's kind of like the exercise and health psychology side of things. And that was actually the side initially I thought I'd be interested in. And as I kind of did my degree and I came out, I realized that actually I would love to kind of work with the kind of inner workings of people and athletes. And it just felt very natural to me. Powerlifting itself came from, I think I worked with individual athletes first. I was like, I want to work with individuals rather than teams. I had a few friends that were competing in powerlifting, training in powerlifting kind of in its earlier days. Well, not earlier days, that was quite a while ago, but still quite a few years ago. And I started training in the style myself, and I just started taking on athletes, either kind of for free or for very, very cheap to build, to kind of build myself up. From there, and I've been very lucky to work with some of the people that I have.
So I think that's like really, really interesting that like first off is, you kind of, I think that from myself too, like I can relate in a certain sense because when I was in college, I was considering doing like physical therapy. But then I realized that like most of like really the population I wanted to work with. And one of the things I talked to with some of the athletic trainers there was the reason why they like athletic training more than physical therapy is like a lot of times they, in order to work at the university level with as an athletic trainer, you kind of need to have a higher level of degree. Like lots of them are physical therapists, or like they like the relationships that they actually have with their athletes and their clients. So what was like what do you like in terms of main reasons why people seek you out? Like what have you noticed is like some of the main things why these high level athletes seek you out in terms of helping out with their athletic performance?
Yeah, so what I find is kind of two streams of athletes that come through. There are people that have ideas of, I suppose, issues or areas that they want to work on, and there are athletes who are kind of pretty comfortable with how they perform, but they just want to polish that in a way, like they want to stay on top of it. Same way as, perfectly kind of mind sound people go to therapy, as well as people that have particular issues, because it's just a healthy kind of habit, it's a healthy thing to do. I would say at this stage, while it's still becoming part of the norm, it's more of the former, and it really does range. A lot of the popular areas that I work with is, people coming back from injury and the psychology around that and getting back under the bar or putting more weight on that bar, general confidence and anxiety and performance anxiety, and focus. One that's actually started to crop up a lot more recently has been arousal regulation, which I think is such a fascinating topic. I think when people first come into the sport, a lot of what they see is the people getting backslapped and, screaming and, ammonia and all of that. And so naturally you're like, oh, that's what I've got to do. I've got to get the backslaps and I've got to get the ammonia. And people sort of rush into that thinking that is the right thing. And, you'll see people like Jonathan Kaiko, who is super calm when he comes on the platform, and even at the top of his lift or after he's finished lifting, super calm. And then you've got people like Bobby Butters, who I know is really interested herself in sports psychology and knows a lot about it, who is very energetic and shouts and all of that. So it's really fascinating, that side of things as well. I went on a bit of a tangent there, sorry, but those are some of the areas that, are more common that I see.
Yeah, I think that like has, if I'm not mistaken, it's called the arousal curve for athletes. Like and I can speak to that one myself. When I first came into the sport, I was definitely a lot more extroverted. I thought that that's kind of like what you see and you think, therefore that's what I have to do. But then I kind of realized that over time, like especially in training, I realized this like myself, like I don't perform the best like that. And I just competed at my my last meet this weekend, and like I even told like my friends like going into deadlift, like I don't want you to shout at me, I don't want you to hit me, I don't want ammonia, I don't want anything. I can go to that place in my head when I need to on my third deadlift, but it's not going to be like screaming. And then you'll see it like after it's done, like that excitement and all that like rush. And I think that a lot of that has to do with like, I guess like personality type, I guess in my experience, because I am not the type of person where I like to think things through, and I like to be rather calm. And I've seen a lot of my athletes who like, that's something I've had to advise them on a lot, is that because I think a lot of times it can lead to some really big errors in technique, or it's just not you too as an athlete. I think that's a big part
Yeah.
of it. Like you need to find your own sense of self as an athlete. I think that is probably the number one thing I find is the hardest to like coach. So like I'm sure that you kind of help people out with that. I think there's a lot of, like to talk about like relationship with yourself with the sport, but like how do you sort of walk athletes through, I guess, like finding their own, like where they are on the arousal curve, and like finding themselves as athletes instead of feeling like they have to like force themselves into what they see as like as successful in powerlifting.
Yeah, and it's kind of avoiding getting caught in those boxes, like we spoke about. The go-to for a lot of people is ammonia and shouting and things like that. And if you actually really look at those people at the top who do that, it's still very, very controlled. It's not chaos, it's controlled chaos. I'll refer back to Bobby because I think she's such a good example. Is she will scream and yell and come to the platform, and then you'll see her go up to the bar and she speaks some words calmly to herself. So she's very hyped, but it's very, very controlled. The way I kind of like to describe it to athletes is how we naturally view arousal, I think, is an on-off switch. There's the high arousal there, or it's off. We go from one to the other. But it's better to view it as a dial, you know, and we can choose the percentage that we want to be at, and learning to do that. And I think it's what we do walking through with athletes is I'm trying to tell them not to be afraid of trying something that's a bit opposite to what they're used to, because it can feel really uncomfortable. You know, if you're used to being quite calm, it can be uncomfortable trying to go to the other end of the spectrum, or vice versa. A lot of it can be trial and error, but when we get to that point, when I'm working with an athlete, usually we've been working with each other for, you know, a little while, and it's easier to tell about that specific person because I know them, I know their training, I know to some extent, you know, their thinking style, the direction that I personally would push them towards. And that would be, hey, try this, you know, give it a go. We'll meet in between what you're doing now and what I think will be a good place for you to be. And I am always very athlete led. They come back to me and said, yeah, no, that really wasn't working for me. I go, okay, great. We know that that direction isn't right. Let's try a different one. But a lot of the time they'll say, actually, that feels more comfortable. Can we do something, you know, around there, but more in this direction? So similar to coaching, it really is about listening to the athlete and getting to know them as a person. And I think if we're talking about like powerlifting coaching, you can see the difference between those high level coaches, or the actually not even high level coaches, the good coaches, and the ones that maybe go through athletes a little bit more by how well they actually know their athlete, rather than seeing them as a data point, or, you know, oh, okay, I just need to get another program done and then, you know, I've finished my day. It's how well do you know the athlete? And it's the same for nutrition, it's the same for psychology, and that's kind of the core of it. So when it comes to the arousal and guiding them through that, a huge part of it is knowing them and knowing the route they will feel comfortable taking to get them to the goal that they want.
Right. And so I guess like going over like, is you know, basically you have to work with that person for a long enough time, as I'm hearing you, to actually develop that rapport. And then you're going to basically say, okay, well, let's try this in your own training. Like what are some things that you sort of like look for? And like, is it really just there say like, that felt really good, where like I feel like I was able to focus and like I didn't like feel like zapped after it? Or like what do you sort of look when like determining like, or working with that athlete to find like their own like quote unquote optimal? I'm sure it's a range though, obviously, like you said, of like that arousal curve. And like also like I think especially if we're talking about over like a meet, like how to periodize that effort like across a meet.
Yeah, and it is hard as well, because the practice you get very rarely is going to be a meet, it's going to be training, and that in itself is a completely different level of arousal. You know, I've worked with athletes who, when they started working with me, were exactly what we're speaking about, really hyped, and, you know, everything hitting their heads on bars, you know, screaming, yelling, ammonia, like literally everything you could get out of the book. And then after the day was done, they would, you know, when you've had such a hard session and you just kind of sit there silently staring at the wall because that's all you've got left in you, that's kind of where they end up. And it's about not only managing yourself during, but before and after and in between. It's a whole day. And that kind of goes back to the arousal dial that I was speaking about. You know, if you're able to learn in training how to control that to, okay, I only need to go up to 60% today, you know, or I know that I'm optimal around 40% for bench, or whatever it might be, you know, that it's something that you can practice and adjust on competition day, because your 60% of training may feel like 80% in competition. So knowing how to, okay, I need to bring that back down, and even having that visual cue of, you know, I'm turning the dial down, I'm bringing that lower, can be really, really helpful. So it is hard, because a lot of the things we work on for competition, same as with coaches, won't be done in competition. And it's another reason that I think, where possible, having meets that are just a little bit more fun, low pressure, are really good if it fits into their competitive schedule, because, you know, we're going in, we know the pressure's lower, we know that the arousal might be a bit different, but it's still going to be higher than training. And so many elements to that. Let's test a taper, let's test a peak, let's just have fun. Whatever that kind of mini goal is for that, I think it's so important to sprinkle that in here and there, even for just having a lower pressure meet. So in training, it's how can we best replicate how to adjust it in competition without making every training session feel like, okay, it's competition day. Like, because I think a lot of people say, yeah, put your singlet on and pretend you're competing and get people to, and that is great for some sessions, like some big SBD sessions. If you did that every single session, every single week, every month of the year, it's going to tire pretty quickly, and people are probably going to stop wanting to watch you lift your SBD sessions. But yeah, I think I went a bit off tangent there, but
no, I mean, I love what you said. It's like it's kind of like I don't like, I only wear like my singlet, like for example, like in competition, like there's like certain things like I only have for competition because like it's special for me, and like I'm like, okay, like this is meet day, like I have a competition shirt I don't wear other than like in competition. And I think having like rituals too, like in general, like you kind of mentioned that a lot of this is kind of finding like a flow, like a flow to like your athletic performance, to your psychological arousal, to what you are kind of doing. And I think that in the sense of like what I sort of do in my own training is if I have like a warm-ups, like I'm like, okay, I still need to focus. Like my one friend and I were actually talking about this at like meets, like a lot of times we'll see people start to miss their first or their second attempts because they don't have that focus. They're kind of like, they're too relaxed. They aren't focused enough. And there needs to be a certain amount of like respect for that weight and a certain amount of that dial that you have on. And for myself, I found that especially like, I mean, like I even do this with like stimulants. It's like I kind of found that for myself, a lot of my own psychology goes like, how wired do I feel? And periodizing that stimulant use and kind of just finding over time what that optimal is for you based on what you said. It just comes down to a lot of experience and then trial and error. And I think that especially with like meets and whatnot, that's a big asset that you actually put out, is like the more often that you do compete or that you get more of that experience, you're going to be better able to actually manage that. I also think that sometimes relinquishing control too of like every single of like the outcome. Like one of the things I tell my athletes whenever you go into meets is I say, okay, like number one, like I tell them, if you're nervous or excited, it's very similar things. So kind of try to reframe it. Second off, like, did you do everything you possibly could this prep? You did? Okay, cool. Well, then whatever happens on competition day doesn't mean you're good or bad person. You can be frustrated, but it's really important to be able to move on. I think this is a good segue to like, how do we sort of like dealing with like failures? And I think a lot of times, this sport is so objective. But also we also need to remind ourselves the nature of powerlifting competition is it's probably one of the most precise things you have to do in terms of execution. You could train for entire trainings like on the best block of your life, and something could just go completely wrong. Or even with like injury, that's I dealt with injuries in my past. I think every single elite powerlifter does. How do you sort of walk athletes through dealing with failure and injuries, I guess?
Yeah, so I suppose I'll go down two different paths for that, because although I suppose sometimes they come under the same umbrella in the way of perception, they're quite different paths. And I say that because a lot of athletes can see injury as failure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're hand in hand pair. But with failure, it's such a complicated area, and it's both complicated and pretty simple in the way that everybody has such a unique relationship with failure based on their life, their experiences. If I'm working with someone who's an ex-gymnast or ballet dancer who's now in powerlifting, or to expect that they had a pretty harsh coach, that failure wasn't really an option, because that's kind of the culture in gymnastics and in dance, that there's not much leniency for failure. And anyone who really played competitive sports growing up comes from a similar sort of relationship. There are people who have a really great relationship with failure, and it's not that anyone is stuck in one box. People who have a great relationship with failure can definitely slip if they take their eyes off the path. and people who have a bad relationship with failure, or rather have had negative experiences with failure and learned from that, can kind of come out of that in the same way as you can build and unbuild any sort of habit that you want if you have the right keys. And in terms of failure, it's very much doing the best you can do to change that perception. 80%, and that's not a proper statistic, don't take my word on that, but like 80% of our whole life is perception. Things happen to us, things happen in life, but so much of that is, what did that mean to me? How did that make me feel? What does that do to change my life? And that's all perception. So if we're able to take just a little bit more control of our perception, it helps leaps and bounds. So if we can start to perceive failures as, okay, I know what not to do, I know what to do, I can learn from this, take it actively. And that's not just, okay, I failed, I'm sure I'll learn a lesson. Take it and actively learn a lesson. What did I fail on? What can I do better? Was there something in my control that I could have changed? What can I do moving forwards? And that is kind of the mindset that you will see with all of these top athletes, all of these athletes going to Sheffield. They don't see failure as, okay, guess I'll pack up my bag, I'm done, what can I do now? Woe be me. They go, right, I know there's something to change. I know there's something that can be done better because I didn't do it this time. And I think a great example of that is, Panna, who bombed out of Euros last year. And I spoke to him afterwards and I was like, how are you feeling? And he said, obviously I'm disappointed, but I'm just going to prove to them that I can do it to the standard that, that they want to see. And he did. And he came back, he won Worlds, and he's going to Sheffield, and a lot of people could allow the perception of that. And this was the day afterwards. It wasn't, it could have even been the day of. It wasn't like months after. It was very quick after. And a lot of people could have been like, that was unfair. I failed, or the system failed me, or whatever it was. But that aids nobody. And it definitely doesn't aid the athlete. He very quickly realized, I can't go back in time. There's nothing I can change from that, but I can learn from it. And I think, of course, me going on this big righteous speech isn't going to help anybody just by hearing it. But you take what's happened to you and you break it down. You go, what happened? And how can I actively work on that? Was that in my control? No. Okay. That thing just happened. Oh, that was in my control. I can work on that. Great, I'll do it. And I'll make it better for next time. And I think that is a fantastic first step to dealing with failure, but also changing your perception of failure. Okay, I didn't do anything, that was so catastrophic that I need to beat myself up, but I should probably learn from it.
I think that you mentioned like one thing that I think is really important there with like the most important thing there is like first you have to actually confront that and like walk yourself through it. As I think a lot of times like people run away from that. It's like, oh no, like this is like a bad, and a lot of that's because of the perception like I did something bad. And it's like everybody fails, and I told people, listen, in the vlog I'm going to release about my meat day, it's like I've messed up several times at meets. I've learned, oh, if I cut weight a lot, oh, that's what this feeling is. I need more salt. Okay, well now I know I'm frustrated, but I'm not going to make that same mistake again. And I was able to identify those things so well. It's like, holy crap, like that really taught me a lot. And then just not dwelling on it, saying, well, what does this mean I need to do next to get better? Because I think it's okay to, and I think it's important to feel like those feelings of frustration. Like those are there for a reason. I think a lot of times like we repress them in general. It's like, feel those feelings, that's okay. It's okay to be kind of frustrated, you put in that work. I'm sure Panna felt frustrated and whatever. That's normal. That means that you care, but you can't dwell on it because athletes move on to the next. It's funny because like my favorite American football team is the Seahawks. They got blown out by like the Ravens this last weekend. Like it's so funny. After every single team like loses, you'll see the fans like just lose their minds. Like, oh no, like everybody needs to get fired. And like every single athlete and coach in the press conference was like, yeah, that really sucked. Not sure what happened. Anyways, next game. Like, and that's exactly the mindset that you really should have. And, you know, nobody is perfect across an athletic career, and you're going to have meets that literally don't go as planned. And I think that also like your relationship just with the sport in general is so important there. And I was telling my friends, I'm like, I obviously want to do really well, but let's say if, for the worst case scenario, I bomb out on squats or bench press or on deadlift. What happens after that? I'm back in gym on Monday and I'm training. It's like, oh, that's not so bad. Like the same, it's regardless of what happens, the same thing happens. Life goes on. It's important to like still, you know, it doesn't mean like don't care about what you're doing, but don't get so attached to the outcome too, because a lot of times I think like we always think, oh, well, especially in powerlifting, oh, well, once I deadlift X amount of weight, I'll be happy, or once I do this, then I'll be happy. It's like, no, you're not going to be happy. Like you're always going to want that next PR, always, always, always. And so learning how to like also embrace the process and like understand that failure is a part of that process. So, and not being scared of it. Like you're gonna be so much more resilient and be like, oh, that happened. I'll move on and be better. So I'm tangenting too now, but yeah, that's something that's like really like close to my heart, because it's just like, I don't know. I really try to tell this to my athletes. It's like sometimes like, powerlifting coaching, especially, it's like you'll try out different things. Some things won't work. That's just as valuable as knowing what does work.
Absolutely. And it is, you know, it is a privilege to feel so strongly about something. You know, that is such a human thing. You know, it's such a part of human experience. What a pleasure it is to be able to care so much about something that we can feel that frustration and that disappointment. And obviously a caveat of that sometimes is it's going to be hard emotionally, you know, physically for sure. But it's learning to look past that at, like we said, like the lessons that you can learn from it, but being able to do it in a way that you can also move on. So many people, you know, will take how they feel for face value. So they'll feel that frustration, they'll take that and they'll go, oh, this is not a nice feeling, I don't want to feel it, I'm just going to ignore everything behind that. And everything behind that is the good stuff. That's the lessons, that's the things we can learn. But they go, this is an uncomfortable feeling, I don't want to feel it, you know, I'm just going to ignore it and move forwards and class that as a failure. But it's like that classic photo of the guy digging for the diamonds and he's that close and he turns around. It's no, just hold on, just look into that feeling a little bit more. I know it sounds so kind of cheesy and you know, yoga-y and spiritual, but look into that feeling. You know, what is it that made you so frustrated? What is it that happened? You know, back further than that, what led up to that happening? Can anything change that? Like we said before, don't give up before you hit the diamonds, you know, before you hit those lessons, because getting past face value is half the battle. Once you've done that, you go, it's not that bad, I can learn.
I think one of the things there too is just like what you said is like you have to also enjoy like what you're doing, and whatnot, and like the thing like we're process oriented, because I mean I tell this a lot of times with people, like I'll see at meets, for example, like people will, I see it all the time with like deadlift, for example, like I get down the bar and like I spend like extra time like shifting their feet around. It's just like a lot of that comes from like the, you know, being concerned about the outcome. Well, it's like, well, you don't really have as much control over that as you think. And I think that I was talking with one of my friends too about this. It's like, you know, you're going to eventually hit your last PR too, and you're eventually going to, you know, not be making progress the way you want to. And I told my friend Joe, I'm like, dude, I'm going to be that 7-year-old dude who's like just in the gym and I'm not making progress, just want to get a sick pump. And like, it is like enjoying, like, you know, again, like, you know, you said it so well, like we are so blessed, and it matters to like care about something, and that means you actually do care about it. Like how terrible would it be to bomb out and not care about it? Like one the moment that is like done, it's like, what are you doing? Like why are you even training at this point?
You see it a lot though as well. Like I've worked with and I've spoken to athletes who they've just lost their flame. They're just, why am I actually doing this anymore? You know, what is the point? I'm not enjoying competing, I'm not enjoying training. And it's important to know as well, like that is okay. It's okay to go through periods of time to feel like that, because that is, you know, maybe that level of burnout where I can take a step back. When you reach open age in powerlifting, you have what, 17 years where you can be an open competitor. Like you don't have to go 17 years straight. Take a year off if you're feeling burnt out. But I suppose it's just as healthy to think, maybe one day, like you said, you'll hit your last PR, you'll do your last competition, you'll think, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that being my powerlifting career done. That is also healthy and okay, because the time will come for everyone, and that is all right. I think an example of that is I used to play lacrosse, which I know is definitely more popular in the States than it is in England, but and I loved it. I captained my team. It was just such a joy. It was so much of my life. I trained like 3 or 4 times a week lacrosse, and then 3 or 4 times a week in the gym. Like it meant I went to a sports uni, so that it definitely helped the hours there. But I finished all of that, and it was amazing. It still is such an amazing chapter of my life. And kind of a lot of people say to me now, why don't you join another lacrosse team? Why don't you pick it up again? Like, I'm not ancient, I could play. I hope, but I'm so happy with that chapter of my life. I don't need to try and write a worse ending for something that's already closed and I'm happy with. And that is a hard thing for a lot of people to do, is to accept, actually, okay, I'm done with it. And I'm happy with that, because I think so many people try and drag it out to the point where they hate it, and there are relationships and neither one person wants to end it, so they end up hating each other, that, but with sport. And so sometimes taking some time off and coming back is really important, but I think people are scared to admit that, or to just accept that I'm happy with that chapter being closed. And that is a huge unspoken part of sport, I think, and sports psychology. Like, there are chapters and chapters of it in a lot of sports psychology books, and it's accepting when you're ready to close the chapter. But it doesn't always mean that, and it's a hard balance to kind of strike, because when I speak to athletes about that, I need to be very conscious of the fact that I want to encourage them to enjoy it more and feel better, and okay, let's do what we can to bring that spark back. But I don't want to beat a dead horse. If actually they're feeling past that face value, actually I don't want to I just don't want to do it anymore, I'm done with it. You don't want to push them into something that they're actually done with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you had a really good post on this, I think, a little bit ago, about like how like being like burnout can sort of be like a symptom of just being like too strong for too long, or just being like too high, and like that. Like, I see this all the time. For example, like in competition prep, I tell people like it is so important to take that time to like where you're excited to train again. If that's
Yeah.
1 month, if that's 2 months, if that's a few days, it doesn't matter. Like, you need to be able to like take that time for yourself, and like really recognizing that there's reasons why you're feeling the way that you do, and comes down to really identifying. I think a lot of psychology is really that. It's just actually sitting down, reflecting a little bit on your emotions. Like, one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is like, one of the rules I have for myself with anything. So if I get triggered by something, I have a rule like listen, think, pause, and then respond, because I think that that is a great way to be reflective of why you're actually feeling a certain way. Because it's like you need to have that spark, and this is supposed to be a fun process in general. Obviously, anything, there's not going to be so much fun parts of things, but um, being willing to take a step back when you need to, and like I said, like take a year off of powerlifting, like that's fine. Like, like what happens when you come back? Yeah, you're a little bit weaker, but it's going to come back, and you might be like, oh man, this is what it feels like to like make PRs again and get that rush again. That's a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and it is really important. Like you said, it's being strong for too long sometimes, and it's learning how to break that cycle being, you push, and you burn out, and then you have to come back, work from being burnt out. And it's okay, how do I catch myself before I reach the burnout, so I can continuously work, recover without reaching that point of burnout. Even if that does mean taking a break before you've burnt out, whatever that might look like. I think sometimes, and this is regarding all emotions, we can consciously feel something and not acknowledge it. If you're being, if you're being a bit aggy, or you're in a bit of a mood, and you're conscious you're being a bit aggy and being in a mood, being a snappy, and you're like, in your head, you're like, why am I being like this? I know I'm being a bit of a dick. and then but you can't stop, it's just happening. And I think that kind of can happen with a lot of emotions, and it can happen with burnout as well. Like you can become conscious of something and know it and know what the right move is, but then every fiber of your body is just pushing against that and you're not listening. And I think, like you said, reflecting is a huge part of that, to kind of acknowledge what you're thinking versus what you're feeling and the right path to take, because it's not always going to be easy, and that comes in the form of difficult decisions, difficult training, cuts. It's not always a pretty side of lifting, but it also comes in the decision making side, where you have to go, all right, I'm not going to do that competition that I was going to do because I need a little bit more time, or my pec needs a little bit more time, or I'm actually not excited for it and I don't need to qualify, I've already qualified. Whatever the reasons might be, sometimes it can feel like, because powerlifting, especially if you're not at that top 1% going to IPF Worlds, because it's not seasonal like other sports where they have an off season and an on season, they've got pre-season, have like set times of the year. It just feels like you're constantly rolling and you're constantly going and no one's telling you to stop, so you have to learn to do that yourself. It's not like American football, or to you just football, I suppose, where you have
the football.
Yeah, well, no, I think I'll disagree about that, but
Fighting words.
Yeah, but I assume I picked a sport I know very little about, but they have seasons where they play. They have like seasons where it's like pre-season, they have off seasons where the teams don't play. You can correct me if this is not the case for American football, because again, I should have chosen a sport I know more about. But powerlifting, I do know about, and like I said, no one tells you to stop, and that can be difficult if you don't learn how to.
Yeah, like that's number one. First off, that yes, that's true about football. There's like in season and off season, so correct. Yay, England. But anyways, like you're welcome. But like what I do as a coach personally is I will tell my athletes like this is the goal of this block. Like especially like after blocks, like what I kind of do for my athletes is like I'm like, oh, this is like a bodybuilding block, or like this is like a more of a volume block, or this isn't supposed to be as hard of a block, or I'm like, hey, this is going to be like really hard of like a block because it's intensity is going to be really high. You might feel like crap, whatever, but like having them expect like anticipating like what's going to happen, what the whole point of this is. And one thing I always ask about my athletes too, this is a lot of why I also have really good client retention, is I ask them, what do you want to do right now? What sounds the most fun? Does it sound like fun? Are you having fun in training? What do you want to do? Because a lot of times, like as coaches, like our job is making our athletes make progress, but a huge part of that is having them buy in and enjoy. And the more involved I feel like you can make the athlete with the process and feel like have like a hand in the decision making, obviously every athlete's different, but especially as you get more and more advanced as powerlifter, you kind of become a nerd with yourself. You know exactly what you want, what you respond well to. You have suggestions to your coach. And some athletes, they just telling me like what to do. I don't really, it stresses them out having that, but I think giving them expectations and then saying, listen, what happens, this is what the goal of this is. It's really, really helpful. And I think a lot of times, like what is optimal for people in terms of programming is very much psychologically related to what is most fun to them. Because like, for example, me on squats, don't like squats, very uncomfortable, not built well for them. So if you were to tell me do high intensity on your squats and like high average intensity, like I'm like, nope, like I have like one set I'm willing to push myself on. I'm much more willing to push myself on my accessories. So therefore my programming looks kind of like that. It's like pretty easy background work, but then I like bodybuilding. I like I like every other leg exercise except for squat. So I'll push those really, really, really hard. As I love deadlift, and it's like I do more deadlift volume and a lot more intensity on that than I do on my squat. And so that's how I make the best progress.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point in that when someone enjoys it, they look forward to it, they're so much more likely to put that time and effort in. And I think it goes alongside a lot of the time, which can't be controlled generally, with what is going well. Like my volume Larson right now is going well and I'm loving it. And I never thought I would say that. But it means that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to put more kilos on my set of 7 on Larson, you know, and just because I'm enjoying it, not because I truly care about how my Larson is going, but it's something that I'm enjoying, and that is because it's going well. If it was going terribly, I'd probably feel about, you know, how most people feel about Larson, which is not fantastic. And I think it's hard because coaches definitely walk the line of, you know, a good coach, like you said, they listen to the athlete, what they want to enjoy, what they think is fun, but they need to also play the part of boundary setter in that sense, in that maybe you get a sub junior lifter and he goes, oh, I want to do Ep.59 singles every week. That's what I think will be really fun. You know, I want to max out every SBD day. And, you know, there are going to be times, maybe not to that extreme all the time, but things that won't be conducive or productive to their training. And it's kind of walking that line of, I need to do this because I want you to enjoy the process, but you also have goals and we also want you to move in the right direction. And I think actually in all regards, there can be roadblocks there in nutrition, in psychology. I think the best advice to athletes is, if you want to be helped, allow yourself to be part of the process, but listen as much as you talk.
Yeah, so like, like in regards to like doing like hard things, I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially like as powerlifting is getting to be more mainstream, I guess, quote unquote, you know, it's still not. You get less people that are athletes. Like I actually had like a real like, you know, team sport athletic background. And I think I found that in general, like they have a really hard time with like enduring that suck. Because like I played sports all as a kid, and you know, unfortunately coaches don't really know, like what they're doing. They kind of just use exercise like a form of like punishment. So like I kind of learned like the hard way, like, yeah, I just do like what I don't want to do sometimes for like whatever reason. But like, you know, if say you're doing something that's like really hard, so you know, somebody's like having a really hard time with pushing through a period where like it's not the most fun thing, but you know, it's like a part of their goals or whatever. How do you sort of identify, I guess, how to do that, especially if you've never had like that team sport experience before?
I think it's hard because, like we kind of spoke about before, environments definitely do build motivations, they build character, they build habits. And, you know, it's talking about someone who may have had years and years of going through something like that, similar to myself. You know, if you play you do a drill in your sport, and if you drop the ball, you have to do suicides or sprints or, you know, whatever it is. Like it's kind of help yourself, the punishment helps you, but you know, you do something hard to get better. And I think truly it's a hard side of coaching. I think it comes up a lot more on your side probably than my side, in terms of getting people to do the hard work. You know, there's only so much I can encourage people to do the work that we do together, because it's very like, I will educate and guide and, you know, push you in the right direction, but I can't be inside your head. Not really. You know, I can't help you do the thing. You know, you have to go off and do it and come back to me, then we will change, you know, and that sort of thing. And I think yours is a lot more action based. Like you're writing the programs, you're giving them the cues, the corrections. And sometimes it will be a case of people that don't come from a sports background actually just may learn in a different way. You know, they might just need something a little bit different, which again is one of those hard things. It's knowing your athlete and knowing what works for them. But you know, it's hard to say. I'm not a coach, nor do I claim to be one. On my side of things, in that case, I try my best to adjust to what can help them stay most accountable. Like I've had athletes or, you know, clients come back to me and kind of say, oh, I don't like doing that sort of thing. Oh, I won't do that. And that's completely fair enough. I know for a fact that when I have a nutritionist, I'm terrible at filling out my macros on a spreadsheet. I just know I won't do it. Again, one of those things that like, I know I should, but everything in my body is stopping me from doing it. And And so they come back to me and say that style is not going to work for me. I've tried it. I just know it won't. So, okay, let's adapt. Let's find a way to get a similar result in a way that fits you, fits your life. And so I'm not sure I answered the right question there, but it felt like a bit of a cop out. So I'm sorry for that.
No, I mean it's a kind of a hard question. I think it's different for like, truly everybody, and sometimes I think that you just have to, from a sports psychology perspective, it's kind of this again identifying like what is the end goal and how does it really play into that end goal. Like I don't like doing high reps on deadlift, but they make my deadlift go up. Like but like I like doing singles, and so like that's kind of like I think one of the things that I do is like I say like, well, this is the reward from doing this, and we know this. Especially, I think it's like it's easier if you actually have like proof of like results from like doing the hard thing. But I want to basically ask about like performance anxiety like on meet day or like around like significant like lifts and training sessions, because I know a lot of times like this, I know somebody asked me on my story yesterday, are you a powerlifter if you don't powerlift, like actually like in meets? And I was like, I don't think so, because it's a different environment, different skill to actually perform on that day, not just physically, but also mentally. But like, I every single meet I get anxious. Every does, because I care about it. How do you sort of talk people through that performance anxiety on day? How do you best prepare for a big single or a big session or a meet, actual competition day?
So what I would do, say someone came to me and said, I get really anxious on meet day, especially for my first squat, which is a very common, problem for powerlifters to have. It's the first lift of the meet. There's a lot that can go wrong on a squat. And so the first kind of questions I would ask, which requires, I suppose, some looking inwards, is how does that present in yourself? What kind of anxiety is that? Are your thoughts racing? Is it physical? When does it occur? Is it before you start walking on the platform? Is it once you start setting up? Is it once you're under the bar? And in what kind of situations does it occur? Is it top singles in training? Is it just on the platform? Like, there's a lot of layers to understand before, I suppose, getting to the point of how do we tackle this? Because I think that is where some people can go wrong, is that they try to go, okay, I'm anxious. How do I get that to go away? Without really understanding, what does it look like? Why, when, who, what, where, so once you're able to answer those questions, in like a general way, you can determine, all right, so actually I'm anxious on my heavy singles in training and on the platform. Okay, so it's usually with heavier weight on the back. All right. And it comes in the form of, when I get under the bar, my thoughts are racing, I can't concentrate, I can't focus. Okay, so we're focusing on attention and confidence. So what it does is it opens up an umbrella of different scenarios, of different areas. So it goes from performance anxiety to, I suppose, for lack of a better term, symptoms, and paths to take from there, kind of the areas and topics that opens up. So in the case I just said, okay, so if we're able to direct the attention towards the right way and increase the confidence, that should lead to a lesser performance anxiety. If someone, just is a nervous wreck, they're just shaking and they get hot flush and their breathing is erratic, we go, okay, how can we bring, I suppose, a level of arousal down? How can we ground you to a place where you feel like you can then better optimize your arousal to go onto the platform or to be on the platform? So the start of kind of any point of access for performance anxiety or anxiety of any sorts there is understanding what it looks like, how it affects you, and what are the actual areas that we need to work on. Because very rarely is it just performance anxiety. It's, okay, you're anxious because, you get performance anxiety, which then in turn you have these thoughts, that walkout felt heavy, you know, am I bracing properly? Was that deep enough? Whatever those thoughts may be, let's say. And then it kind of becomes a spiral. Did one cause the other, or did this one cause the other? And it kind of becomes hard to tell. But if we can put something in the middle there and we can go, actually, let's control these thoughts, let's direct them better, let's not necessarily get rid of them, but, you know, give yourself a better direction of attention, then at least we can break the loop. So it very much will determine, I suppose, the answers given by the athlete. But the first order of events is to understand further what that looks like, what it feels like, and how it's affecting you.
Yeah, like for me personally with that, like a lot of the times it's like the biggest thing I've noticed with most people is they get freaked out when it feels heavy. I'm like, that's the sport. It's supposed to feel heavy. We're lifting heavy singles. Like you like I that's one of the things I've found like for myself. I would always get so anxious about that. I mean, like, what if this feels heavy? It's like, and I remind myself, like, this is your third attempt squat, dude. Like, it's gonna feel heavy. It's not gonna what are you expecting? Like, you know, to suddenly turn like an RPE 5, like you have 15% peak, and it doesn't happen. And really just, you know, saying this is going to be heavy and like trusting cues. And like for me, myself too, it's also just like when I get on the platform, I take my time. I don't rush because I have a
Yeah.
minute. And I really have found that for myself, like gathering my thoughts. And before I get under the bar, I deal with all of that, you know, all those BS thoughts, those doubts, whatever. And then I get under, like, once those are out of my head. Because I find out for myself, if I can get under the bar, I don't have that. I have in myself, it's going to feel heavy. You're going to have to fight for it. Trust your cues, trust your technique. Then I kind of just drop my head and just go into a flow state. And it's like, I don't remember anything about my lifts. That's how I like perform the best. If I'm thinking about things, I just don't do well. One another thing too is like performance anxiety for myself is being around the meet all day zaps me, and it gets me really anxious. I'm watching how everybody's going. I'm like, I also like, I used to be like, oh, like what, like depth, like are they, what's their depth? I'm like, I can't control that. Like my depth is my depth right now. Like it's either depth or it's not. Um, like just getting away from me, like walking around, like watching like cat videos. Like I literally do, like I do like stuff to just like make myself just like, not since like care less. Like not this is like it's like we're talking like in between less with that, but like I think that for my like for, whatever it brings you yourself comfort to, for me, I found it really helps my like myself and my athletes. It's like one of the guys in my meet, I was laughing about. I'm like, he's just constantly eating, and I talked to the camera. I'm like, I guarantee you, bro, is just really anxious. And that's how I was coping. Like that's just, you know, that's what you have to do. That's fine. Um, but I know it's such a complicated topic. But I love what you said about, again, identify those feelings, understand how you can better regulate those emotions, and then direct your focus. I think a lot of it comes down to as well your actual preparation, having a good plan. Like I don't plan on big peaks ever with my lifters. I'm like, what does training say? We're gonna plan on that, and maybe have 3% above that. That's it.
Yeah, and you know, from working with athletes and then from what kind of all the commentary I do, being able to watch hours and hours of powerlifting, which luckily I love, so it's good. You know, you see a lot of people deal with the pressure very differently. You know, some well, some not so well. You see people who take the full minute, they're calm, they're composed, and it really works for them. You see people who rush because maybe they're nervous or they don't know what they're doing, they're newer to the sport. But on the kind of other hand, you see people who not rush but go very quickly, who are very experienced because that works for them. I think a very extreme version of that is Kimberly Walford, who this year in Malta obviously came out with like 9, 10, 11 seconds left on the clock to pull her last deadlift. Just, you know, got on there, did it, and lucky it worked out for her. It was very bold, but it's all comes down again to knowing yourself to a T. Like I promise you, a lot of athletes will leave 10 seconds on the clock, and I've seen it before, and it's not been on purpose, and they panic and they go quickly. But if you know yourself and you know that works well, or using the whole minute works well, it makes no difference to anybody else as long as you feel optimal, you know, because I couldn't think of two athletes who would treat a competition day the same way, you know, not two.
100%. I guess that's the last question. What's your favorite part of your job? Just to end off on a fun note.
Oh, so on the psychology side of things, it's actually, it's going to sound so cheesy. Every time someone asks this, I feel so cheesy. Working with athletes and going from the first call we have with each other, the first time we speak, and knowing that the areas they want to work on, the issues they want to work on, to then whatever meet it is, if it is a meet that they're working towards, and to see them conquer, I suppose, areas that I knew were a big struggle for them, that were, really, really difficult, for them to speak to me afterwards and just say, that was the first time in the longest time I enjoyed it, that I actually felt like myself again. And to me, kind of allowing people to reconnect with their sport, I suppose, in a way, which is essentially a huge part of a lot of people's identity, is a really wonderful thing. It brings a lot of joy to people in powerlifting. Obviously, as you said, it's not quite a mainstream sport yet. People who are in powerlifting, they're there because they love it. They're not there for the fame, they're not there for the money. They're there because they love it. So to be able to reconnect people to that is a fantastic feeling. And not saying that I'm the person that does that, but to be part of that journey, is amazing. And then on the commentary side of things, I feel very blessed that, I can go to all these international competitions and see all these amazing athletes, see my friends from different countries that otherwise I wouldn't see, and be a part of something amazing. So again, a whole lot of cheese, but that's my answer.
No, I mean, that's I think that's like an amazing thing. It's just, you have a really important, it's a special job, and a very, it might be cheesy, but those cliches are cliches for a reason, though.
Yeah.
And it's very clear with, people that you work with, and the performance is getting better too. I always tell this, people who are professionals in this sport, these are, deserve higher compensation. Whatnot. These performances are just getting better, and it's because of people like you. And so, yeah, you should definitely feel proud of what you're doing. And I just really appreciate you being willing to donate your time and come on. This is really awesome for me. I learned a lot too about it. I think that plenty of people did as well. So people want to hire you, they realize, oh crap, I got to get my mentals in check. Amelia ripped me apart. How can they get in contact with you?
First of all, thank you very much for having me as well. It was a pleasure. It was nice to chat. And yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to contact me, they can go to my Instagram, Pots Thinks, and they can just send me a DM if they want to be casual. If they want to be a bit more formal, they can fill in an application form. But my DMs are open if you want to ask a question, if you want to have a chat, or if you're considering looking at this sort of thing for yourself.
Awesome. I'll make sure I also put those in the show notes for convenience. So again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to listeners for listening. I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.